Yes.
Good morning, everyone. While we're getting set up here, we are the team that worked on the correspondent banking model assignment. And today we're going to give you a little glimpse into our paper. You got to read the paper to get more. And we're going to lay out our objectives, our approach, the findings and recommendation in the shortest summary we can. So the objective of our paper was to review and analyze the current correspondent banking model. And in that, we were to look at the limitations on cross-border payments and the impact it is having on financial inclusion. Due to this large scope of banking platforms, multilateral platforms that exist today, we had to narrow down our scope to the few existing platforms that would provide us a viable, near future, more inclusive model. So through our analysis of their features, their benefits, their challenges, as well as looking at the published work by the Bank for International Settlements, the Financial Stability Board, as well as the World Bank, to name a few, we've written a paper that will provide some recommendations to help you take your current correspondent banking model from the current state to a future, more inclusive state. So as we went on this journey, we found that we had to learn a little bit more about the correspondent banking model relationships. As we can see, over the last decade, from the heat map, the decline in correspondent banking relationships has touched every part of the globe. But more importantly, it has drastically impacted regions like Northeastern Africa, Central Asia, the smaller APAC countries, Latin America, and the Caribbean. This took us further down into our journey where we now had to understand this decline. Two things stood out: cost for AML and KYC, and the cost for a bank to upgrade their legacy systems and infrastructure. This was challenging banks to provide their own customers with access to global markets, faster payments, more enhanced products and services, which led to the impact of higher cost of maintaining a correspondent banking relationship, concentrating your payment flows through one provider, and the tough choice of de-risking. Now, Jorge is going to speak to you a little bit about our findings.
Thank you, Sue. Through our findings, we've come to realize that global banks have continued to de-risk their correspondent banking relationships. As a result, industry players and key stakeholders have begun exploring other alternatives. One of said alternatives are multilateral platforms. More specifically, these platforms can be subdivided into two main models: the hub and spoke model and the common platform. The hub and spoke model involves the linking of two or more payment systems to a common intermediary. In this case, the common intermediary serves as the hub, and the payment systems are the spokes. The common platform, on the other hand, allows users to reach other participants through a single integrated technical platform. As the diagram on the slide shows, we've also examined further multilateral platforms through our research, including the Buna model in the Middle East, Visa B2B Connect, the Pan-African Payment System, and Finality. The main features of multilateral platforms are the fact that they can be defined as multi-jurisdictional cross-border payment systems. Now, onto the benefits of multilateral platforms. There are four main pillars I'd like to touch on: transparency, access, speed, and accessibility. Firstly, transparency, as multilateral platforms aim to reduce the number of intermediaries in a transactional flow. This allows cross-border payments to become more transparent. Secondly, multilateral platforms aim to increase accessibility for participants. The speed of cross-border payments are reduced by multilateral platforms as they shorten the settlement time across jurisdictions. And lastly, the cost, which is always top of mind for us bankers. Multilateral platforms aim to reduce the cost by removing the need to fund multiple correspondent banking accounts. And last but not least, there are also challenges to this model. The main challenge extracted from our research were legal and regulatory risk. Multilateral platforms by being multi-jurisdictional, are presented with a divergence of views that sometimes may pose a challenge in the different legal and regulatory frameworks across jurisdictions. Moreover, we've seen that there are currently several initiatives ongoing already trying to aim to tackle the cross-border payment landscape. In short, we've come to realize there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The three key initiatives that I'd like to highlight today are the Global Legal Entity Identifier, or LEI for short, which enables identification of participants and acts as a global directory for financial markets. Additionally, Distributed Ledger Technology, or DLT for short, serves as a decentralized database which is immutable, private, encrypted, and where the governing rules are coded into the network, therefore adding security to cross-border payments. And lastly, as we all know, ISO 20022 was established and implemented as an international message standardization for financial institutions to use when sending cross-border payments. Lastly, our research also showed us that in the last decade, between 2011 and 2020, the number of wire payments has increased both in volume and value. However, at the same time, the number of total correspondent banking relationships has decreased. Therefore, we come to the question we must ask ourselves. Are we really doing more with less? And our research shows that, in fact, we are. Therefore, we can see that our current correspondent banking model is not sustainable and features a non-inclusive model for smaller and regional banks, making it more difficult for them to remain competitive in a global payment landscape. I'd now be handing it off to Ambar, who will go over additional findings and our recommendations.
Thank you, Jorge. So based on our research and interviews with industry experts, we came across the following findings. Differing banking regulations across the globe are creating obstacles to the development of faster and efficient cross-border payments. As the cost of compliance goes up, we have seen global banks exiting non-strategic markets. An unfortunate consequence of this de-risking is the fact that certain regions are now losing access to global markets and important currencies. The challenges faced by the correspondent banking model has created a space for alternative options to be explored. We examined various multilateral platforms that have come up and are trying to solve the challenges faced by cross-border payments today. We also observed that most of these platforms focus on technology-driven solutions to address these challenges. However, we believe technology alone cannot solve every single problem that we face. Regulatory dialogue, data sharing, and standardization of market practices have to happen in step with technological innovation to enhance cross-border payments and drive an inclusive future. So coming to our recommendations, what can we do to bridge this compliance gap between large correspondent banks and regional respondent banks? Our first recommendation is about public-private partnership. The G20 commissioned the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure to provide their views on the future of cross-border payments. We recommend industry associations such as the BAFT, who can be the voice of banks in front of audiences such as the G20 and the Financial Stability Board. We would also recommend regional banks to join BAFT's Regional Bank Council so that their voices and concerns can also be heard. Our second recommendation is around data and market practice standardization. We strongly encourage the adoption of the Legal Entity Identifier initiative that Jorge spoke about, because we believe the LEI can drive transparency and data sharing across borders. And finally, our third recommendation is for regional regulatory frameworks to align. We have heard this multiple times over the last day and a half. It is important for regional regulators to talk to each other. However, banks can also encourage their local policymakers to maybe take up the recommendations around compliance provided by the CPMI or the FATF. Independent certification or ratings of banks and other payment service providers can help make sure that these compliance standards are then met and maintained. We go into further detail on these recommendations in our paper. However, the 3 on your screen here are ones that we believe are immediately actionable and can help us build an inclusive cross-border payments infrastructure. Thank you, and we will now happy to answer some questions.
I see 2 questions coming up so far. How does cost drive the de-risking process? Do you want to take it? Ines, do you want to take it? Could we have a mic, the second mic, please? Oh.
So, now it's working. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for the cost, it's for transactional on the transactional side, and there are explicit costs, costs really on the transaction and operational costs. And then we have implicit costs. This is costs to maintain the relationship, KYCs, and also to the due diligence. And these 2 costs have to be in balance with the profitability of the relationship. And if this is not in balance, there will be an exit of the relationship. And Sabi, do we want to go?
I think there's, maybe to add to that, there's also, from the respondent's perspective, they also have costs that drive them to perhaps exit certain relationships. In that they may find themselves sharing fund or dividing their funding across correspondents or their flows across correspondents, which prevents them from having the leverage to negotiate perhaps better pricing if they were to concentrate that flow. So cost is certainly not only a factor for correspondents, but also for respondents in exiting certain corresponding banking relationships. The second question, can multilateral platforms replace the current correspondent banking model? That's a very interesting, who wants to take that one?
I take that one?
Okay.
Thank you. So, thank you, Sabri. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, maybe one of these, I mean, everyone would like to have an answer. So, I mean, multilateral platforms are unlikely going to replace the current correspondent banking model, I mean, as of now. So it's not one-size-fits-all solution, but more product that can live alongside, I mean, the current correspondent banking model that can fill gaps that there is right now, basically in adding some financial inclusion, increase some speed, transparency, at an acceptable cost, I mean, marginal cost that can enhance, I mean, the global correspondent banking payments. You want to add something on that?
I think you've covered it. Perhaps the next question I see is, how would you convince regulators to support independent certification or due diligence?
I can take that one.
Would you like to?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's 2 points that we need to focus on. First of all, I believe regulators across the globe need to talk to each other. You know, every region and every jurisdiction has different regulations, and we believe that an independent certification, either rating or certificate, would maintain a level of standardization across the globe that would allow us to make the current correspondent banking model more inclusive, especially for smaller and regional banks. And then secondly, we believe that it is the role of independent bodies such as BAFT to hear the concerns of regional banks and larger global banks to then approach regulators and lobby on their behalf.
I see this, if anybody wants to add something to that. And then maybe this next question, because I think it's fairly interesting. From your findings, what did you think drove the reduction in corresponding banking relationships over time? Is it de-risking, AML, or cost issues? If you guys don't mind, I'll take this one, right? In fact, it all comes down to cost. AML is in fact at the end, a cost-driven issue, and it's a balance of that versus the profitability over the relationship. If we had infinite appetites, if we had infinite budgets, then it would be great to cover every region of the world. Part of it is also in terms of the unknown cost of potential fines for mistakes or challenges that could happen that we aren't aware of. So in the end, there's also this unknown cost factor of if things go wrong. So in the end, it's risk, but it's the cost factor for risk. We're running over time. Thank you. With that, we invite you to read our paper. These were some of our recommendations. We have other recommendations as well, but these are the ones that come top to mind, or are most practical. And we're still available around, so if you want to engage with us to discuss on this paper and on this topic, we're more than happy to do so. And with that, thank you.